Please join me in welcoming back to the stage the director of Possessor, Brandon Cronenberg.
Thanks for staying. I have two of my very close friends and core collaborators on Possessor here tonight. I'd like to welcome them to the stage. Producer and AD Rob Cotterill. And cinematographer Karim Hussain. So the thing is, the science in the film is, to a certain extent, rooted in real science. I mean, there has been a long history of neuroscience that deals with brain implantation and actually controlling bodies through electrical stimulation of the brain. So that stuff is sort of real, but the reality of the science fiction in the film is, of course, not something that is about to happen. It's not just around the corner. And I was more interested in it from a kind of metaphorical perspective, that it was a vehicle for talking about other things. I have very specific ideas about the narrative and about the symbolism and things like that. The intention is very specific. But the film's made to leave some space for interpretation for the audience, and my dream for the film is to have people discuss it and disagree and have different takes on exactly that thing. So
yeah, I mean, we don't just look at stuff and copy, because that's completely boring. Obviously, we're big, fans of movies, fans of the genre, big horror fans. Radical, surreal movies, things like that, things that push the limits. So, every movie you will see that you enjoy will have some sort of kind of influence on it. But the thing is, we never look at something and say, let's copy that. We look at something and say, okay, that was really cool, that was inspiring, but how do we make it different? And how do we try to do something that elaborates on that? So yeah, of course, we saw a lot of Italian horror movies we love, giallos, a lot of surrealistic stuff. Certainly Dario Argento's Opera was a movie that we looked at quite a bit for some of the violent sequences. But we've been looking at these movies since we were bloody kids. It's not like something that so it's sort of ingrained in your DNA, but one of the most important things about this movie was we must do something new with it. We cannot just do homage, we cannot just copy. There's so many movies out there that we want to propose something new.
We always use films as a reference point, so we can immediately understand what kind of zone and world we're going to. Like me and Karim and Brandon and our special effects, Dan Martin, master. But that's how we communicate with just talking about movies, and we know what kind of zones we're going into in the process of the film.
Yeah, I mean, we used a lot of techniques. We're actually using sound. Like at the beginning of the movie, when you see the water appear kind of frozen and then it go backwards and reverse, that was a practical effect shot on set, where we put a subwoofer with a very loud, low-frequency tone that synchronized to the camera and the shutter angle that gave the illusion that when we were looking through the camera of the water freezing, and then you change the frequency of the subwoofer and then it gives the illusion that the water is moving up backwards. That was all done practically. Again, the acoustic levitator, the scene when he's hallucinating and it looks like the fan blades are melting, that was done practically on set. Basically, we played with the shutter angle of a very cheap camera that would create that effect to give the illusion of the fan actually melting. All of the stuff that you see when Andrea shows up, and it's sort of like the mixing of the two minds, and it looks kind of blurry, and there's sort of a yellow flare. All that is done practically. That is not an optical. What we did was we took the rushes and we video projected them in my living room, and we photographed it with a lens baby, which is basically like a kind of weird plastic accordion with a little cheap lens on it. And basically most of the yellow flares you see in this movie are Brandon Cronenberg originals. Brandon is the one right beside the lens flaring yellow light into it and looking at the monitors. So stuff that normally people would do on CGI, we did practically, because I think in your guts you feel it. In your guts you feel that the effects in this are different. All the melting heads, live melting heads. Dan Martin, our great effects person, and his team built these incredible wax heads. We melted them with heat and just sped it up in camera and flared it. It's, so basically it's very unusual to make a picture that way these days, but hopefully it paid off, that in your guts you feel that it's something a bit more different and special, we hope.
I have time for just a couple more questions. Oh, and please go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. I was just going to say the last. Sorry, can you tell that we're enthusiastic about practical effects? But the last, we had our secret final day of shooting that some people who worked on the film don't even know happened. It was just me and Karim in Karim's living room for like 15 hours, losing our minds. Dead of summer, no air conditioning, just like making cloud tanks and building up that kind of hallucinatory material.
So yeah, this is a question if the gore element felt essential to you in the way you're telling the story.
So I mean, there were two things motivating the gore. I mean, in general, I think violence in film should be explicit and visceral because I find it more disturbing personally if it's very sanitized and people are dying but you don't have an emotional reaction to it. So as a more general rule, I think that has value. But in this film, in particular, I would say the violence is extremely narrative. I mean, so much of Voss's character is about her relationship to her work and her relationship to that violence, and so showing it explicitly but in different ways, really related to her character psychology. We see it come from kind of a almost third-person perspective. The stabbing, for instance, which is brutal but quick, and then flashing back to it, it's this almost kind of sentimental thing for her, a fetishistic thing for her. So in a film where bodies are so important and her relationship with violence is so important, I felt it was very much a part of the narrative.
I'm so sorry that's all the time we have. Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you so much.